Today I'm joined by Rebecca and Maylin from the Ferm, who are doing amazing things with kimchi and food waste. Rebecca and Maylin, welcome.
Thank you for having us.
My first question is, what is kimchi?
Oh, good question. This is one of the very first questions that most people ask, actually. The terminology kimchi comes from a word called timche. Tim means to dunk something under brine, and te means teso. It means vegetables. So in its essential original format, it's the same as lacto-fermented vegetables that you would see in Balkan countries. So it didn't used to have any of the spices that we have now, but it has transformed over the centuries by the innovation that's been happening with the women in households, and now we have something that's very different to what it originally was. So the chili flakes, we never used to have chilies in Korea. They're not native to us. They came in the 1400s. Chinese leaf cabbages came from China in the 1900s. So before that, we would just use any other vegetables like radishes, cucumbers. So there's 200 kinds of kimchi out there in documents, and that's not including diaspora kimchi. It's a more of a method rather than one specific dish.
Is it a regional thing then, or is it a family thing?
Well, both. The whole country used it's definitely existing in all both North Korea and South Korea. But the ingredients and the methods are very different depending on the region. So 60% of Korean landscape is mountains, so we don't have a huge capacity for agriculture. So we would have to preserve a lot more than what we could produce. So the whole kind of idea came from resourcefulness. So we would use salt to preserve different types of harvests. And because we were so poor as a country and we went through so much war, it was incredibly important to make sure that everything we could eat would be used. So in the northern regions of South Korea, we would use more of a kind of a less salty, briny, more watery type of kimchi. That is kind of, we think of that as northern kimchi. And then in South, it's a little bit warmer, so there's more salt, there's more spice. That tends to be a lot more funky, that it's very pungent because we also have more access to the ocean, which means that we put in more salt, fish sauce, and shrimp paste. So it's more of a thicker pasty type of kimchi rather than a briny, watery one. So I'm from the south, so when I eat Seoul style kimchi, it's very mild to me. And then if you go to North Korea, they have coriander kimchi because they don't have a lot of harvest to begin with. So it depends on the regions. We also put fruit into our paste, and depending on what type of fruit is grown in the region, we would put in different ones. So Jeju Island, which is an island below Korea, they would add mandarins because that's the only place in Korea that really grows mandarin. To me, that sounds really different to the type of kimchi that I've grown up with. Some places use squid sauce instead of fish sauce, and different islands have their own kind of twist to it as well, and different families have different ratios, and so yeah, it's a huge variety.
You mentioned there that in the South they use fish paste, and I mean, fish paste itself is a fermented product. I think that's right, isn't it? So if you're eating kimchi from the South, the more funky version, it sounds like you're really getting a lot of healthy bacteria for your gut.
Yeah, salted seafood in general has been with us for a long time. It's probably as old as kimchi or any salted vegetables to begin with. It's just a way to preserve the seafood. The tricky part is it does tend to animal ferments are different to vegetable ferments. The bacteria that grows is very different. The protein within seafoods turns into amino acids, which tends to be the flavor that you get. So if you think of miso, the reason why miso tastes so good is because it has the protein from the soybeans. So it's the same idea with the fish sauce. So the more fish sauce that you put into a kimchi, the more umami it gets. Whereas if it doesn't have as much fish sauce, it's very kind of fresh and it's more of a vegetable ferment. But there is also a risk that there are also bad bacteria that grows on it as well. Protein is easily, it goes off. So you would need a lot more sodium to preserve protein rather than vegetables. And that means we have a high sodium diet. And Korean food in general is very vegan friendly. It has lots of fiber. We don't use a lot of oil because oil is just, it's too expensive for us. So everything is blanched and it has a bit of soy sauce to kind of marinate different things. But, um, the only kind of fault in our cuisine that I would say is the high sodium. So a lot of people, there's a high percentage of digestive cancers in Korea, like colon cancer, stomach cancer, and there's a theory that it comes from a high sodium diet. And it's not as common anymore, I think. But like for example, we consume a huge amount of instant ramen, and that has a high sodium. And I think the preference for that type of flavor comes from that long line of salted vegetables and seafood.
The salt question, I'd love to come back to that if there's time, but um, I know you are working with food waste. So is that a big part of the story of the kimchi that you're making as well?
Absolutely. I think, well, I studied food waste and food insecurity in my master's, which was 7 years ago at London College of Communications. And but I've always seen my mom and my aunties and my grandma use all parts of the harvest. So they would always preserve the stem of the sweet potatoes, the leaves of the chili, taro stems as well. So these are habits that has been coming down through generations because we just didn't have much to eat. So my mom would always kind of like scrape off the parts that have gone off and then always try to finish the rest of the dish. She would never throw anything away. And I wouldn't say they're like admirable parts sometimes because, it can be risky, but I think it's something that has been kind of I've always been used to people really taking care of really paying attention to everything. So when I came to the US, when I went there to study for 7 years, and since I've been in London, it was just so prevalent that it just doesn't, people don't clock it. They just don't see how much waste it is because that's not how they've been brought up. And then I would go to different waste management sites and markets to see what type of, actions that they're doing to try to prevent this. They just aren't. It's just cheaper to throw it away and have it go into landfill. And it's a more expensive option, but sometimes they do compost. But they're valuable parts of the harvest that the water consumption, labor, energy has been gone into making these parts that are consumable for humans, but they just don't eat it because it's not part of the behavior that they've been taught. And to me, that was just such, there was a gap there that I thought that's where the idea came from. It was initially trying to look at wonky fruits and vegetables, but there's kind of a monopoly around those materials. So only a few organizations have access to those, and you need to deal with them to have access to them. Whereas quote unquote inedible food waste, that's a different type of food waste. That's the parts that we handle. Cauliflower leaf, broccoli stalks, beetroot tops, these parts are offcuts and they're not wonky. And the difference is that the quality is so high because they buy the broccoli that day, the chefs use the florets, and we get the stem that day. So they're really fresh, high quality ingredients, and they're also high in fiber. They're difficult to work with because there's a reason why they don't use it. It's the high fiber, it can be the bitterness. But the best part about fermentation is that it draws out these amazing flavors through the microbes digesting it, the lactic acid, and makes things more bioavailable. Health-wise, flavor-wise, it's just the perfect combination to really work with food waste. So that's where the idea comes from. And initially, I would only have access to chefs who were interested. They have respect for food. Whereas if you're looking at veg prep manufacturers, they're much more difficult to convince. They don't have a marketing incentive for them to work with us. But eventually we would, have bigger amounts of cuts that we can collect, and that would give us more leverage. It would be cheaper for them to send it to us than to throw it away. So this is kind of how it all started when we started working with different partners. And now we have amazing suppliers we collect about 300 to 400 kilos per week. And we have a capacity. This is just a tip of the iceberg. This is not how much they can give us, it's how much we can take and sell. So as long as we kind of grow demand, and this is only two, three suppliers that we work with in London. Imagine all the catering companies and veg prep manufacturers that exist in London. We can do so much more.
I mean, that's extraordinary. So you're saying the limit is not how much they produce in terms of food waste. So, I mean, I know that we have a real problem with food waste. And am I right in thinking that households are the biggest creator of waste, and w households make about 60% of food waste or something, which is shocking.
Bizarre, yeah. I think the last report that I've seen at Warp was saying that it was about 55 to 60% with household levels. And the other and the farm level is the second biggest. And the supply chain that we work with, which is hospitality and veg prep manufacturing, is the smallest. So we're actually tackling the smallest, slice of pie when it comes to food waste. And even then, it's just huge. But there's, apps like Olio and Too Good To Go, and there's all these incentives to try to reduce food waste. But I think at household level, it is difficult to tackle. They're hard to control. It's individual behaviors. So it's not something that we focus on. What we can do is indirectly inspire people to think, oh, actually, you can use cauliflower leaf and broccoli stalks and give them ideas. But it's not really tangible for us. It's not measurable for us. What we focus on is the manufacturing level.
I remember going to a farmer's market several years ago, and the guy was selling me carrots, and he said, "Oh, do you want the tops?" And I said, "Not particularly." And he said, "Oh, but you can use them in a salad or something." And I thought, "What? You can eat the tops?" And I think I just hadn't been taught that that was normal. You know, everyone says there are all sorts of recipes telling you to use the carrot itself, but no one talks about using the tops. And ever since then, I'm happy to use the tops in salads or something like that. Okay, so you've got all this food waste coming in, but is it exactly the same as if you were buying produce? I mean, I feel like you're adding someone to your supply chain. Maybe there are question marks over how they handle it. And does that mean that when you're making ferments, it you treat it exactly the same as if you're buying the ingredients that wouldn't normally be thrown away?
It takes more time to prepare because the system is already set up for virgin materials. It's a linear economy. So to create a circular economy in a local sense, it's going against the grain. So what we had to do is communicate with the supplier a few days before so they know what to collect and when to collect and how much to collect. And we have to create paperwork so that it is a viable product that we can collect and use. And the specification sheet doesn't exist for cauliflower leaf because it's not a product that they offer. So we need to create that and give it to them. And then they measure the weight and the temperature, and then the courier collects it and send it to us. Then we wash it with veg wash, and we cut it, salt it, and ferment it. When I think of one of our products, we have four SKUs, and one of our products is Chinese leaf cabbage, is classic cabbage kimchi. And those ones we don't rescue, we buy from New Spitalfield Market. They're mostly imported from Spain and Netherlands because UK doesn't have enough sun to grow them. But it's so much easier to buy those cabbages because we just, text our supplier the day before and they don't charge delivery. It's just offered. And it's because it's already a product that people consume and the system has already been created. So it's bizarre that something that's from Spain we can get immediately, but something that's in London, 20 minutes down the road, there's so much communication we need to have to create that supply chain. So it is tricky, but in terms of costs, it's about the same actually because the courier that we use charges by pallets. So it's by volume. And so it's people ask why is your product as expensive as other kimchis if you're rescuing waste that is donated? But this is why. It's because the system isn't there and we're creating it and that comes with cost.
From what you said, it sounded like the bits that you're using have plenty of flavor in them. So, would people recognize any difference between if they're eating yours or someone else's? I'm assuming it's still packed full of flavor, but do the waste product have a slightly different flavor to the core product?
Absolutely. I think modern diet has trained our palates to not have preference towards bitter flavors and more high fiber flavors. So they hide those fiber ingredients into drinks and something that you can't really taste. But the polyphenols and the natural fibers that exist within the offcuts is it's just not it's not sweet. It's not like a mushy texture that most people like. So the reason why we don't use the cauliflower leaf but the cauliflower itself is because it's sweeter. So to make that flavor more palatable, it took some time. I think people describe our kimchi as earthy and crunchy, and that is because of the nature of the ingredient itself. And we're not trying to repackage it into something that is sweet and that's more of a processed food type of flavor. So it is catering towards people who already have an understanding towards the value of this type of food.
Our taste buds have definitely been hijacked. One of my favorite books, which I'm always talking about, is The Dorito Effect. And
Mm.
it talks about how we are perfectly able to regulate our own diet and health if we follow our taste. But you've got to train your taste because when you grow up in a diet of, I don't know, instant noodles or confectionery, you're tasting flavors that were created in a laboratory. And it's nothing like, let's say, if you eat a tomato and you get 600 different flavor compounds from it versus a synthetic tomato product in a supermarket that might be maybe has four flavor compounds in it. So it's no comparison. And that is one of the biggest problems I see as a barrier to health at the moment. So yeah, retrain those taste buds. Okay. So you were studying at LCC, studying sustainability, but how did that connect you to making kimchi? I mean, there's a whole bunch of different products you could have started with, or even changing the supply chain, but something about kimchi drew you in?
Was just something that I was the most familiar with. I made it my whole life with my grandma. I've I love it. I just eat it every day, even for breakfast. I feel like there's something missing when I don't have it. My mom would, we would go out for dinner, get like fancy Italian food, and then she would come home and eat some kimchi because she just like something isn't satiated. So it's just a huge part of how we grew up. But I think my family in particular does consume more kimchi than average Koreans, I think. Because when I went to Seoul and I would see the kids at Seoul eat kimchi, they would only have like a few pieces with the rest of the meal and I would be having like chunks of it. So I think it's just something that my family tends to eat a lot. So it's just something that I knew really. I think if I were more familiar with, koji-based ferments such as miso and amazake, those type of ferments, I probably would have uh, drawn to that first if I were grown up with it. But I've always seen what kimchi is, how it's made. I know what to do with it. So when I saw those ingredients, it just came naturally to me that I would preserve it with this method. But there's so much other ways to do it as well. There's Nibs, etc., who rescues apple pulp and turns it into granola. Toastale, who rescues bread and turns it into beer. It's just what we're familiar with, I think, as founders, as people.
In the beginning, were you making it yourself? How did you start?
Yeah, I was making it myself. Initially, when I was doing my master's, I would just collect cauliflower leaf from friends in my master's, and then I would take it and then just chop it, make it at home. And then during COVID, I would do workshops on Zoom with a few of my friends to teach them how to make kimchi. And so that was kind of how it all started. And then once I pivoted into a business, I would go and collect cauliflower leaf from restaurants, from chefs with a luggage and would take the bus, bring the cauliflower leaves back, and back to the bar that I was renting at the time. And do everything by hand. I didn't even have a chopping machine back then, so I would just chop everything by hand with a knife. Even the julienning of the carrots, um, mixing everything by hand as well, and putting into jars. So production would be like 3 days a week, and then I would do markets on the weekends, and then trying to do finance and marketing, which I wasn't really good at. So I was trying to figure out all of that at the same time. So it was kind of like a mini MBA course that I was doing by myself in the first few years.
Did you have the idea that it would be a business, or were you just doing it for yourself and for friends to start with?
I never wanted to become a businesswoman. It's not really in my nature to think about money. And I never, it was not something that it was interesting to me. The reason why I really decided to make it into a business was because of my visa. I needed a visa to stay in the UK, and saw that after COVID, after Brexit, it was just difficult to get a visa sponsorship, working sponsorship. So I saw that my school was endorsing startup visas, and I just thought I would apply for it as Plan B. And if I probably won't get it because it's so competitive. UAE is a huge umbrella university. Lots of students apply for it. So I didn't think that I would get it. And then so I just like, oh yeah, kimchi is my vehicle to reduce food waste, and I will make kimchi out of all these things. And I wrote the application and did the interview, and they were like, okay, cool, you got the visa. And I was like, oh my God, now I have to actually do this. So this is how it all started. And I was initially thinking I'll probably do it for like a year, and I'll probably find a job, and I can just switch to working visa. But then I stuck with it. Decide, I've realized through it all that there are qualities about me that has always been there that is quite applicable to running a business. And then when I met Mylene, everything changed. We met in November 2024, and I've been looking for a co-founder from the very beginning. I knew that I'm not a business person, I'm not a finance-driven person, and I needed someone commercial for this. So I was going to networking events, doing all these accelerator programs, and then tried to work with so many different people, but it was never the right fit. And then I was like, okay, if I find them, I find them. I'm not gonna try to force it anymore. And then Mylene came along, and I was like, okay, let's see how this conversation goes. Didn't have huge expectations, but we just hit it up from the beginning. I knew that the communication was very aligned. We talk and think in a very similar way, very transparent. And it was just personally, we were a great fit as well, just immediately became friends. And I think we both have integrity in the same way to honor food and honor people. And I knew that that would be the foundation to hiring the right team and making the right products and having the right messaging when it came to the brand. And huge work ethic that I admire. And I was initially working with people that didn't have that. And it's rare to see someone who would put 200% into every single thing. That kind of focus and stamina is very rare to find. And I found that in Mylene. So I knew that it was going to be a great fit. And I learn from her every day. You know, there's so many things that I didn't really know that we needed. If I didn't meet Mylene, I wouldn't have been able to continue. Maybe I had like one more year of juice within me, and I think I would have kind of given up. It was just too difficult, to do everything by yourself. But yeah, since we met, it's like it's a huge boost, and every day is more fun.
Yeah, that's amazing because I know it's not easy to find a co-founder. So, Malin, how do you split the business between you two? Do you have defined roles or do you kind of work together on things?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question because I have a completely different background, even though, as Rebecca said, like the work ethic or how we see the vision of the company is extremely aligned. I have a very commercial background. I went to business school, studied business psychology. I worked in business consulting for 8 years. I did my PhD in leadership, so I'm very business focused. Um, but the reason why I wanted to start my own business or co-found a business was not, as Rebecca said, driven by money. For me, it was always about passion. And when I was looking for the right startup to either start or join, I had three buzzwords in mind, and these were gut health, zero waste, and plant-based foods. which is, as you can imagine, a perfect match when
Mm.
I met Rebecca. Um, and the reason for that was that I used to be a competitive athlete and I was always very passionate about nutritious foods and gut health as well. As you probably know, the gut is seen as a second brain, and there's like loads of connections and also dopamine, serotonin, immune system. It's all regulated by the gut. So when I met Rebecca, obviously she's set the groundwork for for 3 years, 3.5 years. And because we were so compatible in terms of skills, we wanted to do everything together to make sure that she can upskill me, but that she can also learn from my previous experience. So we did something called the car crash approach. We said we need to learn from each other so that in a few months or years' time, we're able to run the business without the other person. Obviously, that's the worst case scenario, and we don't even want to think about it. But it's our baby, and we need to make sure that if one of us is on vacation or can't continue growing the business, the other person can continue. So we kind of mapped out at the beginning to see our strength and what we would like to focus on, but we also quite quickly realized that this is not our best approach. Our best approach was really to do things together or at least discuss tasks together, and then we can still conquer and divide the task, but we make most of the decisions, if not even all the decisions together. That's been to our success, I think, so far.
You mentioned the business background, which I get, but and also coming from a sporting background, I understand wanting to be as healthy as possible. But you mentioned zero waste. Why was that important to you?
I think it's just something like an interest I had in myself and also developed over COVID, once I got into cooking a little bit more. But I also thought that using the broccoli stalks or cauliflower leaves is just, it's a nutritious way to fuel your body, and people just disregard it. So when I met Rebecca and I saw that she's literally combining all three buzzwords that I was kind of envisioning, I thought it was genius. And I was obsessed with the idea, and then I met her, and then I was even more obsessed with her and working with her. And then we quite quickly realized that we were a really good team. And I think at the point, I haven't even tried the products. I was just like, I'm in. And I think it took me 2 or 3 weeks until I actually did a tasting with Rebecca and knew what I was trying to build with her or trying to sell with her. So I think, yeah, the zero waste element is just like personal interest. I also am following a vegan, vegetarian diet. I try to use the train rather than the plane if possible. So it's just a very sustainable approach to life, I guess. And zero waste was kind of linked to that.
Well, I approve of that. That's amazing. Okay, so do you see yourselves as a ferment or a kimchi business, or more like it seems to me you're in a very strong position to be able to change the way that people eat and how the supply chain works? Is it more the food waste side, or is it more the food product side?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've actually pivoted from a kimchi or Korean brand to fermented brand or heritage-driven fermented brand when Maylin and I joined. So um, I was working with our design team already when Maylin and I met because I wanted to pivot from jars to pouches. The fizzing and leaking, I just couldn't deal with that anymore. When Maylin and I met, we did 3 focus groups and we realized that there was a lot of room for improvement when it came to the brand and the product design itself. So we got all the feedback and we kind of co-designed the packaging with our customers basically. And from that, what we gathered was we don't want to pigeonhole ourselves into a Korean brand or a kimchi brand. And obviously, Mylene coming from Berlin, we can kind of leverage her German heritage and expand into sauerkraut and other types of ferments that exist in Eastern European countries. So this is definitely something that we're looking into. But as you said, there's so many ingredients that is available to us. So the last ingredient that we really considered was tender stem broccoli. So after they grow above a certain point, they have to put it into the plastic packaging. So they cut off the bottoms, and they're delicious, crunchy, edible parts. And we would get crates and crates and crates of these things. So we were looking for a way to kind of preserve that and ferment that. So that's a potential possibility. I've worked with okra, I've worked with watermelon rind. So many different things can be turned into ferments. And I always say that you can kimchi anything. There's definitely a huge potential to expand. I think it's we're in a phase where we're kind of expanding our range and pivoting into what we want to be, which is Europe's biggest fermentation brand.
Yeah, and maybe just to add on that, beginning when we did these focus groups, we also wanted to understand the hierarchy of our claims because we have three very prominent claims, which is zero waste, as you mentioned, the family recipe we're using currently for our kimchi and pickles, and then also later on the sauerkraut products we're going to look into. And then also that we're naturally fermenting, not pasteurizing, mean you get all the probiotic benefits. So we have these three very strong pillars. And we tried to understand, because for us, the zero waste aspect was amazing, but we tried to understand what customers see as most important. And it was actually not the zero waste aspect, it was more lean towards taste. And they also really bought into this whole family recipe aspect. So I think I would, or we would lie if we would say that we have it 100% figured out, because there are different customer groups valuing different things. And the zero waste aspect is definitely something we're still highlighting, but the majority of people, for them, price, taste, family recipe is more important at the moment.
Okay, so let's say you can grow to whatever size you want. Is it more important to you that you carry on using food waste to make ferments, or do you think it's more important that you just make ferments and you source food however you need to?
I think Mylene and I, we would prioritize rescuing, upcycling waste for sure. This is a core part of our value. It is difficult to build, and right now, the reason why we offer one of our SKUs as not upcycled, it's zero waste in a different sense, is that we don't waste the core of the cabbage. We use a whole cabbage as a whole, so there's no waste in that way. But hopefully we'll be able to rescue more waste. I think what we're focusing on is the impact rather than sales. We will focus on those ingredients so that we can also experiment with other types of food waste, like wonky fruits and vegetables. We can work with Felix Project, for example. They can give us a ton of cabbages that are not fit for supermarkets, and we can make sauerkraut out of those, and that's different type of waste as well. But there's so much potential. We need to really focus on what we're doing now, I think, instead of get this right, instead of just, growing different SKUs and having different processes and getting it confused. So for this stage in our business, we're focusing on one of the two ingredients that we do work with, which is cauliflower leaf and broccoli stalks.
Yeah, yeah. Great. Um, I read a book recently called Avocado Anxiety, which really opened my mind up to water. And I think there was some statistic in it about how we import 62% of our water because vegetables and fruit and I think even meat and fish is grown abroad. And so we're importing the water used to grow those things. And that was really shocking to me because we don't necessarily have a too big a problem with water here, even though we do sometimes get droughts in the summer. But in the countries where they're growing a lot of these produce, they really are water stressed. And so we're kind of removing the water from their system, which just seems terrible. Do you know anything about that? And have you got plans to focus on just using local produce?
So water footprint, it was something that I did study during my master's, but right now what we focus on is the weight of the vegetables that we're rescuing. We're not doing any analysis on the CO2 because the actual CO2 impact from growing cauliflower and broccoli is quite low. So it's less about reducing carbon, it's more about reducing waste as a concept, the weight itself. So we're putting back the nutrition that is being lost back into people's diets. So that's what we're focusing on for now. But I think as a small company, we can't really afford to have these kind of big reports, and our focus is more on manufacturing and rather than analyzing and having these reports, which we would love to do at a later point, and we want to get B Corp certified at certain points. So, it is something that we are having in our minds, but it's not, we don't have a tangible number to say we're offsetting X amount of water or carbon footprint. So, right now we don't have a strong statement for that.
Yeah. Did you ever eat at that restaurant called Silo
Yeah,
in?
they're good friends of ours as well. It's very close to where our factory is. I met Doug a few years ago, and he really loves the product and the concept. And their head chef Moon is also Korean, so we've done panel talks together. Ryan, who's head of fermentation, he's now leading their separate project in Koji. And yeah, we're good friends. So they're also going through salsa certification and building their manufacturing site. So very similar stages, and we go back and forth. But yeah, amazing food, great concept, obviously huge inspiration for us. Really leading the hospitality industry, and their network is amazing. And so yeah, that's a good place to visit if you. I guess it closed now, but if you still want to get in touch with them and look at their Koji project, it's also super interesting.
Yeah. I remember him talking about how even the glass for the wine bottles they managed to reuse, and they have a special machine for grinding it up, and then they can make whatever they want from it. And they would make sure there was no like polystyrene packaging on when they're getting machinery delivered and that kind of thing. And I thought that is really amazing. All of those things that you never really think about. And yet he's showing that it is possible. And it's not only possible, it's possible to do it commercially and turn it into a business. So I'm sad it's closed, but my understanding is he's gone on to help other people across the whole world now. So hopefully his story is going to become even bigger.
Yeah, I think it's also because if Doug is not at Silo, it doesn't really work, and if he can't be there the whole time, and he just recently had a baby, so I think it's a different stage in his life as well. But yeah, his consulting work and also the Koji project that he's doing now with Ryan is meant to be having more impact and scale. So I think yeah, they're definitely scaling up in a different way that is not in hospitality. Um, but yeah, their vision is very huge. Their
Yeah.
scale is also huge. They're making tons, literally tons of koji for the impact that they're trying to create. So yeah, very exciting. But the innovation when it comes to thinking of each step of the process and different ingredients, definitely very, very inspiring. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I take you back to the early days of the business? You said that you were doing farmers markets. Is that how you started to get sales? Were you doing online or anything first, or was it farmers markets?
Farmers market first. It was the only place that I could sell without certain certifications or the packaging had to be a certain way, and I was still pivoting and testing a lot of flavors, so it was the only way to really test out really quickly. So imagine if I was selling to retail and I had to change the pricing and the packaging and the ingredients every month, then it wouldn't work for consistency for the customers. So farmers market was the only option for a while. And I did every borrow, every market. It was trying to also test out different demographics, speaking to them every single weekend, understanding what the age, gender, and different people's preferences are. And so it's also about reading what their emotional reaction is to the food itself. And the first questions that they would ask, what the curiosities are, what the pain points are, huge learning for sure. And it's something that I think is very different to how we sell our products now because the jars versus pouch, the messaging that we're trying to communicate, and how people buy something at a market versus retail is also very different behaviors as well. But it did kind of set the groundwork, and then I started selling at Shopify online D2C in April. No, on Farmers Market was April 2022, and Shopify was 2023. So it was a year after I started doing the farmers market, and then that's when I realized I can't ship any of these jars because they break and the packages would go lost and damaged. And also I would get so like tired after packing it. It just doesn't work. So if I didn't do the online D2C in the very beginning or didn't do the farmers market and within the summer heat it would every jar would go fizzing and leaking. There was one time I had to just bring the whole box to the bathroom nearby and I was just wiping all the kimchi juice and burping all the gases out and stuff. It was just a huge mess. And if I didn't go through all of that, I don't think I would have had the um, idea to switch to pouches. And I was like, I don't care if all the other kimchi brands in UK are using jars. This is just not feasible. It's not, it's wasteful. And I had to make a change. So I think we're first movers on the pouch because of all the struggles that was there to kind of highlight why we can't do this. I still don't know why or how other kimchi brands are, doing this. They're covering all the costs for all of this. It's also the sanitization, the labor cost that comes behind that as well, and the weight. But yeah, that's kind of like the background to how it came to be.
I mean, for me, when I think about because my background is in packaging and design and branding, I always think that time when you have direct contact with customers is so important. And over time, when you design packaging, you're really just the packaging is doing the job that you would do when you're talking face to face with the customer. But if you haven't had that conversation first, you don't know what to put on the packaging. So it's so crucial. It's such a foundational part. And I think there's a lot of founders who think, oh, I want to have this huge business and I need to just scale and be as big as possible. But actually, you got to, if you can do it on a small scale, then I think you can do it on a really big scale. So you went from farmers market to Shopify, and then did you start to get retail listings as well? Was that something that was driving sales?
Just a few shops around the area. So I would just visit independent shops, talk to the managers and owners. I think when Mylene and I first met, it was around maybe like 10, 20 shops that we were selling at the time. And it was if it was close by, I would just deliver on my bike with my backpack. So it was all very small scale, and we didn't have a separate business account with a courier to pick up and do all the fulfillment and the deliveries. We do fulfillment in-house still, so I think that is the contact that we have with the customers, looking at the box and see how they receive it. If we're including little notes or pictures, it's our kind of like little message and effort to have that connection with them. But farmers market I did until last summer actually. So it was something that I continued to do because first of all we needed that extra cash, but also as we pivoted into pouches, I wanted to see the feedback as we grew. And they would say, "Oh, how come it's in this?" Or "Is this recyclable?" Or "Oh, it's actually quite light." Or the little feedbacks and nuggets were really kind of important. But also the focus group that Mylene and I led was the most insightful thing. I think what we did was we would take one participant individually and then show them the pouch and say, what is your first reaction? And the way they would describe things, it would be like, kind of looks like tea, or like I don't know exactly what it is. If I'm passing by, I don't think I would kind of gravitate towards it. I think it needs to be really bold. All of these feedbacks were incredibly important. So we consolidated all of that insight and data, and our design team executed brilliantly. But the idea for focus groups was actually from Mylene because I was initially like not sure. I mean, we already have the data, but I think like sitting down everyone to just look at the product, people that didn't know our brand, people who didn't know us or the product itself has never tasted kimchi, that was the perfect demographic to really work with. And still, we're still in our bubble where we need to think about random Joe in the middle of nowhere in England who has maybe heard of kimchi once. We need to be able to speak their language and sell the kimchi to them as well. So it's still something that we kind of think about as we market and do our sales.
How was it going into pouches? Did you have to explain, or was it difficult to get customers to understand this is a fermented product? Because it's not very common that we have fermented products in pouches. I have seen some, but it's very rare, and it's probably even more rare when it's actually still live.
The first day, or during the first week, Rebecca and I met, she immediately told me, "Oh, we're moving away from jars to pouches." And my initial reaction was like, "Why? This doesn't seem like a smart move." And then she came up with all the advantages and reasons for it. And she even told me that in Korea, kimchi is only sold in pouches. And actually, in Germany, we have quite a few brands who also sell sauerkraut in pouches. Once she explained to me it's better for transportation because of the fizzing, leaking, breaking. It doesn't bloat because there is more room for the gases, and we also put gas absorbents, which is up. Like Rebecca, you can tell more about the gas absorbents we're working with, but it's actually the most critical thing working with pouches that you have the right gas absorbents in these so that the pouches don't bloat. Um, but also from a consumer commitment perspective, it's just so much easier to take a pouch rather than a jar because it's so much lighter. And also from a transportation emission view, it's just because it's lighter and less sturdy, it's just so much more environmentally friendly to actually ship pouches. So she came up with all the reasons, and I was like, I literally don't have any reason against it where we shouldn't switch from jars to pouches. And I mean, I only joined Rebecca for a short period of time with the jars, but as she said, the amount of times, like I had kimchi juice all over my backpack, my trousers, and I was like, wow, this is really me coming from the corporate world to the startup world. Um, I loved it, but it kind of convinced me quite early on that we have to move to pouches. And then yeah, Rebecca mentioned it, the focus group. So the reason why we initially wanted to do the focus groups was not to inform our design because Rebecca worked on it with the design team for quite a long time, and I bought into it because it looked great. So the initial reason why we did the focus group was to understand how we need to educate people why pouches are better than jars. So we had the objective set out for the focus groups, and then we just got overflooded with so much feedback on the design. And it was so powerful because we not only understood how to educate people on pouches, we also understood how we need to redesign our pouches. And I think most founders, I don't want to say they're ego driven because I think it's just a sort of self-fulfillment or identity that they want to project their own design, their own ideas on the packaging. But I think, especially Rebecca, I was so impressed because she really put her ego aside. She was like, okay, even though I've been working on the design for 1 to 2 years with the design team, I'm open and I'm happy to change the design. And I think our branding is one of our competitive advantages because we're not only selling in pouches, we also have a consumer-led design which clearly states what the product is. It really stands out on the shelves, and we get so much like positive feedback, compliments on our design. And I think it's really because we listen to what customer need. Because as a founder, you're so like deep down into your products and your vision that sometimes you forget what actually customers want or need.
Yeah, I mean, that whole piece is, it could even be the most important lesson in business. And I've seen people spend crazy amounts of money on hoping to get into the right magazine or use the right influencers. But if your customers aren't interested in that magazine or those influencers, it is just wasted money. So, yeah, you absolutely did the right thing there. Now, I'm very conscious of time, so I don't want to keep you, but I have about 1,000 questions I could ask. Honestly, this has been fascinating. But I've got two questions. The first is, how do you stop the pouches bloating? You mentioned there was a gas inhibitor or something that you used.
Yes. So the biggest emission is actually the CO2 is what is created, methane as well, but it's actually a smaller quantity. So what we did was, first of all, we had to find the exact material for the pouch that could withstand the acidity of the kimchi. So the microbial activity, they digest and degrade the actual material. If we wanted to claim 6 months of shelf life, 12 months of shelf life, it doesn't compostable and biodegradable wasn't an option. I really wanted to work with those type of materials, but after so many testing, it wasn't feasible. But if there is any other material that is invented later down the line, of course, we're happy to look into that. But yeah, the material itself, that was one piece that I needed to find to make sure that this is specific. So I had to contact kimchi manufacturers in Korea and ask them what they're using. And so it's a kimchi specific material that we're using for our pouches. Second is the bloating aspect. We had to measure how many cc's of the volume of gas that is produced in different SKUs because they all have different properties. So Napa cabbages have a bit more sugar and less fiber than cauliflower leaf and broccoli stalks. Broccoli stalk is actually not kimchi, it's changachi, which has a bit of sugar in the brine, and the sugar would really feed the microbes, so it would get bloated quite big. So we had to measure the volume of it and see what size and type of gas absorbents we needed to use for different SKUs. And then so I would contact the gas absorbent companies in Korea and import them here and use them. And then there was a time constraint to it because every time we open a packet that has 200 units in one pouch, we would have to use it in an hour because it's exposed to air. It's already absorbing the CO2. So there was a stress to put in the gas absorbents in the pouches immediately, and then seal the rest of the gas absorbents so that it's not exposed to air. And then that would cause issues down the line if it's been opened too many times, or if we didn't seal it immediately, then the effectiveness would be less. So what we did was look for a different option, and we found this patented technology in Korea that inhibits the microbes from fermenting more. So it doesn't pasteurize the microbes. If you take out the sachet, it still bloats and it still ferments, but it could actually potentially put our products into an ambient product, which is going to be a huge game changer for the whole fermentation industry. So we're contacting them, right? They're a startup, so they need to get all the specification sheets, the English documents, the EU documents that we need to sell here. So we're not working with them now, but we're negotiating to become their distributor in the UK, and testing our products to see if we can safely use it, and have all the documents backed up for it. So this is going to be another huge advantage for us. But for now, we use the gas absorbents, and yeah, that's a new kind of our secret weapon that can come up in the next few months, hopefully. So yeah, that's what we've done.
I mean, that also raises a whole bunch of questions, but I said two more, and here's my last question. Which is your favorite product from the range? Mylin, do you want to go first?
It's a very good question. And luckily, I think we can justify every single SKU we have because if you ask our team or like even our flatmates, for instance, they all have very different favorites. My favorite is the classic cabbage kimchi, the blue pouch.
Rebecca.
Mine is a spicy. Just yeah, can't the spice is the most closest to what we have back home. It's a very strong gochugaru flavor, so yeah, that's what I like the most.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much. That was super interesting, and I really hope you turn it into a massively successful food business, but also help change the industry as well.
Thank you. Yeah, that's the plan.